So we've established now what is required of a licensed agent and a registered salespeople. Remember, a licensed agent is required to have different qualifications to a registered salesperson. And in your own time, you will need to go and read these particular qualifications. We'll look at that in another session as well. So now that we have the right to actually accept money by being licensed or registered, Part 6 talks about the agency agreement, and it's a very important part, which is section 100, that no commission or expenses are allowed to be taken unless a written and signed agency agreement is in place. This is a very important part of the Act, which places a lot of emphasis on the contractual relationship between the agency and the licensee. Once we have that agency agreement in place, or often known as a listing agreement, it means then we can accept monies in trust on behalf of our vendor or landlord. Now, Part 7 then is quite detailed in how what those monies are and how they are to be administered. The important thing about trust monies is that agents accept quite large amounts of money on behalf of their clients. If you take, for example, in a sales context, that an average deposit would be 10% on exchange, and the median price of property in Canberra would be about $500,000. We're talking about $50,000, a considerable amount of money, and the clients need to be assured that that money is being held with the utmost governance. The Agents Act sets out in Part 7 the rules that are required to deal with trust monies. Section 109 will actually talk about the interest on trust accounts, because in this situation the interest does not go to either the client or the agency. It goes to the government for the administration of trust monies and also for the Consumer Compensation Fund, which we'll see a little bit later on in the Act. Again, just for your interest, when you need to go and click on interest on trust accounts, it will take you to the actual section to read in detail what those requirements are. So it'll tell us that we need to have quarterly statements produced, which can then be audited, and the audits are a very painstaking situation to ensure that these trust monies are being cared for correctly. The auditors cannot be related to the agency. They will come in within 3 months after the end of the financial year and go through the trust account records. If there is unclaimed trust monies, this division will dictate what can happen to those. Now, as you can imagine, there's a lot of records to be kept for all of these transactions. So the Agents Act will dictate how those records will be kept, the requirement for receipts to be given to any of the parties involved, and also if the business goes into administration, how that can be activated by this Act. Part 10 is a very important part, and hopefully one that's never to be used by a licensee, but this is the Consumer Compensation Fund, which is set up should any of the trust monies be poorly administered or defalcated or defrauded in the trust account. The money for this comes from the interest on the trust account. So this is quite an involved part of the Act. Part 11 is simply on how the Act is going to be administered, and then Part 12 is on review of decisions. Part 13 is an important one for all agents. It talks about the use of false and misleading statements, but a very important one is Section 171, which is on the rules of conduct. You'll notice if I click on those, it actually doesn't tell me what those rules are, but directs me to a regulation. We are going to look at the rules of conduct in another audio session for you. So you can see that the Agents Act is quite simply set out. It will simply tell us what we need to do as agents, that we need to be licensed, we need to be registered, that we need to undergo certain training and eligibility to get that. Then we have Part 5, which tells us how we're to conduct ourselves as agents and registered salespeople. Part 6 is a very important one because it tells us that we are to have agency agreements in place before we can accept any monies at all. Part 7 is again a very important one. It tells us how to deal with the trust monies that we accept on behalf of our clients. What I suggest you do now is simply scroll through and look at these in detail at your own leisure to understand what are the requirements of agency practice. We will then follow up in another session on the rules of conduct that will dictate what an agent can and can't do.